Hello, everyone. I'm Traci Arieli, end-of-life doula and founder of Comforting Closure. Welcome to our podcast where we explore aging, dying, and grieving. Today, we're talking about a topic that's misunderstood and underutilized: hospice care. Joining us is Shelley Henry. With over 20 years of experience, Shelley's not only a seasoned hospice nurse, but also the co-founder and president of Amity Group. This group partners with hospices across Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas to help address the critical shortage of hospice nurses. Shelley, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Traci. I'm so honored and excited to be here and talking about this really important subject with you.
Could you start off by telling us about your journey into hospice nursing and what inspired you to choose this path?
Yes. So as a nurse, like in nursing school and stuff, we don't really, especially back then when I went to school like 30 something years ago, we don't really know a lot about hospice. They don't really teach you that in school. So when I got out of school, I worked in the intensive care unit in the ER. I did that for about 10 years. And I wanted a way that would be to make some extra money, to pick up some extra time doing something that I didn't anticipate to be as hard as what I was doing. And so one of my friends said their hospice down the road is hiring. And I truly, even though I had 10 years of experience, didn't really know what hospice was. I really thought that hospice was a place where people with cancer went at the end of life. And so I said, oh, okay, well, I'll go check it out. And so I went down there and then I learned about hospice and I started doing it as some extra work and just fell in love with it and realized that this is where I should have always been. And so I quit my day job and started doing hospice full time. And that was 22 years ago. And I haven't looked back since then. I just really felt like this is what I was supposed to do, that helping people through this time was where I was just meant to be.
For a person that's nearing the end of their life, how does hospice care differ from other healthcare options like palliative care?
So, well, hospice and palliative care can be pretty close. And so they get confused a lot of times. So both of them provide palliative care. But with palliative care, you don't get the added benefit of the hospice care. So both of them are going to control your symptoms and provide support and medications and things like that that you need. But with hospice care, you're going to get a full team for end of life support. So you're going to get a social worker, the chaplain, you'll get the CNAs that can come and help with bathing and with doing all of those things. Hospice is also able to provide the equipment in your home and the medications that you need and supplies that you need. All of those things are paid for and provided by the hospice. And they're there with you a much longer term than with palliative care. So you're going to see the hospice nurses as frequently as you need, sometimes even if it's every day, and the CNAs and the team. So their hospice is able to provide more support than palliative care. The difference, though, the bigger difference too between the two is that when you're on hospice, you will not ever seek any curative treatment. So for whatever your hospice diagnosis is. So if you're on for end-stage heart failure, you wouldn't go seek a curative treatment for that. You would stay with all of just the palliative treatment with the hospice.
It's all comfort care. So, but if you have a problem that's not related to that illness, you can go in and seek treatment then for that, of course, for comfort.
Yes, absolutely.
Great. Could you share what a typical experience looks like for a patient entering hospice care?
So when you first decide to go on hospice care, people from the hospice company are going to reach out to you and they will come and talk with you about the hospice care. And they're going to tell you about the care that they provide and answer all of your questions. And let's say if you are in the hospital and you're needing preparation to go home from the hospital because you just don't want to, you want to be at home with your loved ones around. The hospice is going to make all the arrangements that are necessary to get the equipment in your home that you're going to need. They're going to help with the arrangements for getting you home. They're going to make sure you have all of the supplies that you need and the medications and the physical support that is required for you to be at home. And so when you get home, then the nurse will be there and meet you there and go through everything again once you get home and help arrange how things will run when you're in the home and making sure that all of your needs are going to be met. They provide 24-hour availability. So while a hospice is not going to be there with you 24 hours, and I think that's one thing that a lot of people don't understand is that the the patient has to provide the care, the caregiver and the family, but the hospice nurse will oversee that and help and answer questions and those kind of things, but we're not there in the home 24/7.
And you just mentioned one of the biggest misconceptions that people have about hospice care. Um, are there any other misconceptions that are a surprise to patients and clients?
There's quite a few misconceptions. I think that a lot of times, unfortunately, hospice gets kind of a bad rap in the media and stuff because they don't understand it and they don't understand what we do. One of the biggest misconceptions is that we just medicate patients until they pass away, that we give them morphine until they just pass away. And that is completely untrue. I've been doing this 22 years and I've given morphine a lot of times. And the morphine that we use in hospice is an oral liquid, which is not like an IV morphine. It's not nearly as dangerous as when you get it IV, which that can be very dangerous. But with this, I've never ever seen this cause someone to stop breathing. I've never seen anyone have these kind of side effects from it. But that is a big misconception that they're getting liquid morphine and that they're going to pass away. And that's just not true. I think another big misconception is that when you go on hospice, you no longer, like the hospice doesn't treat you for anything, that they basically that you are just going to be in the bed until you pass away. And that's not true at all. If you get an infection, we're definitely going to give you antibiotics. We're going to treat it in whatever orders the doctors provide and whatever makes the most sense. So anything that we can do to keep your body strong and healthy and feeling as good as you can do, we're going to do. So we do a lot of the same treatments in the hospital. We just do them in the home. So I think those are probably the biggest misconceptions about it.
I know that the Amity Group helps provide nurses to hospice agencies and centers. What do you think are the main factors contributing to the current shortage of hospice nurses, and how does it impact the quality of care provided to patients and their families?
So I think the main issues we're seeing, there's a national nursing shortage, and I think everybody's probably heard about that. And then hospice nursing is such a specialty of nursing that there aren't a lot of nurses to choose from to begin with. We already have kind of a little small pool of nurses there. And so the work that we do is very, very difficult. It's emotionally draining. It's physically draining. It's very long hours. It's not we don't do even a 12-hour shift like in a hospital and you get to go home. We become very involved with our patients and our families, and we tend to give so much of ourselves that we're there with them after hours and we're available to them for long hours. We can get some, really high caseloads if an agency is short a nurse. Somebody has to pick up all those extra patients. So that's what our nurses have to do. And so it can start a cycle of, well, your caseload is increasing and increasing, and it just becomes unmanageable. And as nurses start to leave, it can become very difficult for an agency to keep the nurses that they need.
Yeah, I know that working with families and hospices with my families, that team has so many clients to see in a day. They might have 15 different people that they're seeing in a day. So, unfortunately, the amount of time that they're able to spend with a family isn't as much as they want. And I've worked with nurses who come back at the end of the day after their shift to spend more time, and I know how emotionally stressful it is, and so it's it is work that's so needed, and so thank you, and all the nurses out there. Thank you.
And it's changed a lot. I would tell you, Tracy, when I first started doing this many years ago, our average caseload was 10 patients, and we would see them 3 times a week. That was normal. Sometimes every now and then we'd have a patient we'd see twice a week, but for the most part, 3 times a week, max of 12 patients just when we were in overflow, but 10 patients. These days, average caseload is going to be around 20 patients. So it's pretty much doubled, and they may be seen once a week. as opposed to 3 times a week, because there's just not enough nurses to see the number of patients that are being required to be on, that are on hospice. And you think with the baby boomers getting older, and we keep hearing a lot about this, that the number of patients are just increasing. And so we've really got to figure out ways that we can meet these needs and give the patients what they need without cutting any of the care short on the patients.
Many families find themselves overwhelmed when a loved one enters the last stage of their life. How does hospice help with that?
So we are there and available with the family to help them, educate them on what is happening right now, what they can expect. If the patient is having symptoms, we're able to do things to alleviate those symptoms and make sure that the patient is as comfortable as they can possibly be. And just to provide support with between the nurse and the social worker and the chaplain and the CNAs, and we're able to be there with them, just because it's scary. I mean, this is a scary time, especially if you have never done this, but even when you have, it can still be a pretty scary time. So we're able to be there with them to help support them through this time and just answer their questions and let them know that they're not alone.
How does the role of an end of life doula complement the work that you do as a hospice nurse?
So, like I was saying earlier, our caseloads have gotten so high, and that's included not just for the nurses, but that's for the social workers and the chaplains as well. They've either doubled or tripled, and so the amount of time that we're able to spend with patients has been severely cut back because we have so many patients to see. But with an end of life doula, that person's able to take what we've started and the education we've started and provide all of that support on a much more longer, like you're able to be there when we're not able to be there. So it's so important that that's just another person that can be there and sit with them and do all of the things that I wish that I could do, but I just am not able to do a lot of times now. But to sit there and be with the family and support, provide the education, help them understand what's going on, make sure that they really understand their options and their choices and what to expect, because we educate them on that. I always do that when I admit a patient, but it's a scary, stressful time. So how much do they actually retain of what I'm saying during that 1 hour meeting that I'm having with them? So a death doula is able to take that information and really reinforce it and provide it maybe in different ways to help with the family that may understand it coming from a different perspective.
In a stressful situation like that, I know that just from experience, that people who aren't used to watching people become ill and eventually pass away, that they don't know what to expect. And so hearing it once or twice, sometimes just it doesn't sink in, and it shouldn't.
Right.
I mean, it is overwhelming. So being there, and part of what a doula does is that education, as you've said. In the future, do you think that this integration with hospice care will increase where hospice, because right now, most hospice care groups and facilities, that they don't have doulas on staff, the majority of them. Do you see that changing in the future? Do you want it to change in the future even?
Definitely think that it's going to have to. I don't think it's even going to be a choice. So like I said, the need for hospice is growing way beyond what we can even provide right now, and it's going to continue with that. And so I think that, the government also, Medicare is looking at a lot of new quality measures that are going to be measured, that are going to be reported, that are going to become very significant. And so in order to meet all of that, we're going to have added support. And I think just to help with the patient outcomes, I think that I see a huge difference in the outcome of patients when we have a doula versus when we don't. And I think a lot of it comes from, just like hospice, we don't really focus on death. People think that I go on hospice and that's all we're going to talk about is I'm going to die. I'm going to be dying. And that's what we're going to be talking about. And it's really not what we do at all. We celebrate life. But I think that with the doula, there's even more reinforcement of that, because the death doula is able to go in and say, here, how do you want to live your life? And that surprises a lot of people when we start talking about, well, how do you want to live? And they're like, well, what do you mean? I thought I was dying. And I'm like, well, reality, we're all dying. But what we're looking at right now is how you want to live and what is important to you. And so that is where I see death doulas serve a great purpose in that area, and a great, really improving the outcome for the patient and their time and the life that they have left.
I'm not sure if you know Barbara Carnes. She's
Yes.
yes,
Mhm.
yes, just a lovely, lovely woman, and has been doing hospice work and hospice education for years,
Mhm.
decades. And she says that from the time you're born to the time you die, that's all your life. And this end of your life, this time that's happening is still, you're still living, but
Exactly.
it is the last challenge that you will go through, but you're still living. And so what many of the doulas talk about is quality of life and what you want,
Mhm.
and planning for that quality of life. And so we are able to get in there and really work with families to figure that out.
Yes. And I think it's so important because a lot of people also don't realize, and this I see so often when somebody goes on hospice, when we're in there with them on a continuous basis or a regular basis, managing their medications, managing their symptoms, getting everything under control, they actually start to feel better. This is very, very common. And so now it's like, I'm feeling better. Let's maximize this. Let's maximize this whatever it is that we want to do. And that's where death doulas can help a lot too. Because now, hey, I'm feeling better. Let's go do these things that are on my bucket list, or figure out a way that we can maybe do some of them, or do you know what I mean? Just to be able to build those memories and build that time while they are feeling better.
So most people have a huge fear of hospices. We've talked about some of the reasons for that. What can we do to address those concerns, of the families and the patients themselves, so that people utilize hospice a lot more?
I think that, interestingly, now, we have social media. So there's a lot of nurses, hospice nurses on social media that are talking about it. I think that's very, very beneficial. I think just the factual talking of it, the telling you how it really is versus how it used to be reported by the news people, I think is important to help with it. I think that being very open with the patients and the families when we do go have those initial discussions, I'm very open and I'm very honest, and I don't sugarcoat words. I use the right words for whatever. If someone is dying, I'm going to use the word dying. I'm going to use the word death. I'm going to say, you know um I had a patient one time that had was newly diagnosed with a brain tumor, and he was 64 years old. And I went in to meet him, and he had only been diagnosed like that morning, and they already referred him to hospice. And he was the sweetest little guy. He was basically homeless, estranged from his family. He was all alone. And so I go through the whole hospice spiel, and I look at him, and he's just looking at me. And I know what he wants me to say. And I said, "You want me to tell you that you're not going to die?" And he nodded his head yes. And I said, "I can't tell you that. I can't tell you that. But what I can tell you is you're going to have dignity. You're not going to be alone. You're not going to be in pain. That I promise you." And so I think just speaking that fear, saying it, took the fear, it took the power out of it. And so, from that moment on, we admitted him, and he had a beautiful experience with us the whole time that he was there, and probably one of my most memorable people I've ever cared for. So I think that that's just important. Just saying it, you take the fear out of it. You take the power away from it when you talk about it.
Speaking of talking about death and hospice, let's talk about doctors. Many doctors find it difficult to talk about hospice.
Yes.
Why do you think these conversations are challenging for them? And how do you think that medical professionals can better approach conversations about dying and hospice?
So I think that's kind of a twofold issue. I think, as I said, I had been a nurse for 10 years before I became a hospice nurse, and I truly did not understand what hospice was. And neither did any of my friends or any of the doctors I worked with or anybody else in the hospital. We really didn't know what it was. So I think that if hospices can educate the medical people find a way that we can do that on a more consistent basis, not as a marketing tool for the hospice, but as a truly, maybe all the hospices need to come together and provide this education so that the medical people can really understand the level of support that a hospice is able to provide for patients and the way that we can very much improve their quality of life. I think that's number one. But I think the second part of it is that, especially with doctors, they see it as a failure sometimes. They think, well, if I'm supposed to be able to keep you alive forever, I think is what they feel like. And so that they don't want to admit that maybe this isn't going to work. Maybe this is the end of this person's life. And so it's a struggle for the doctors in that way sometimes. And I think that just helping teach them and keeping them involved with the patient. I find a lot of doctors have said to me, well, I don't like to admit a patient to hospice because I've taken care of this patient for 30 years. They're like my family. And suddenly I'm not taking care of them anymore. And I don't know what's going on with them either. So I think that the hospices need to do really good with their communication with the doctors and letting them know, look, here's what's happened this week, and here's what we're doing, and here's how great this person's doing, or here's what's going on with them. And just really keeping those lines of communication open so that they're still involved.
And I almost think that besides that open communication and making sure that that doctor is still part of that team, that some grief work also might, I know the doctors aren't taught, and nurses a lot of times aren't taught that grieving is a natural reaction to a natural stage for what we do. And that we need to be able to feel that and know that that's normal and it's okay.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that would be excellent.
How does hospice care extend its support to families post-death, in the grieving process or other things that need to be done?
So hospices provide support to the families for at least 13 months after the patient has passed away. So will do it through different means, and really as little or as much support as the family needs. So they will send letters and they will send mailers out to the family every month or so, and call and check in to see how they're doing. And for some families, this is all the support that they need. They can also, though, help with referring the family to grief support groups. Some hospices have their own support groups. This can be very important, just checking in to see how they're doing. I'll give you an example, though. I had a patient one time who was a 6-year-old child, and they lived, and I'm trying not to cry because this one always makes me want to cry, but they lived on the top of this mountain, and this little girl had been sick from the day she was born. She had an illness there was no cure for it. And when we brought her on hospice, they lived up on really the top of this mountain where there was almost nothing there. They didn't even have pizza delivery up there. It was very, very rustic. And it was so sweet. When the little girl came on, the only thing that she wanted was to get mail. So I told this to my hospice company. I worked for a really large hospice company at the time. And so the whole company took this on as we're going to send this little girl mail. And thousands and thousands of letters and gifts from all over the world this little girl got in her life. I mean, there was so much of them. They were coming into the hospice agency because obviously we didn't give out her address. They had to make a whole separate room and rent a place to put all of the stuff that came for the little girl. It was really, really sweet. And brought her so much joy. But when she passed away, it was very hard on the family. It was a young family. She had a younger sibling. I think she was 6, and I think she had a 3-year-old little sister, and then her parents. But there was not a lot of resources up there, not a lot of family up there with them. And they fell apart. This family fell apart. And I really believe that without the hospice social worker there to help them, I don't know that they would have made it through intact, but they did. The social worker was able to get them a lot of help and really went above and beyond to help and make sure that they had what they need. And they were able to stay together. So the family stayed together, and the little sister got the support that she needs, because, when you're grieving, it's hard and everybody grieves differently. And it was just a rough time. And so the hospice was really just instrumental in this case.
That's a story. Gave me shivers when you were
Yeah.
talking about it.
Still, and
Thank
this
you.
was years ago. We're still in touch with this family. We still check in with them and make sure that they're doing okay.
Wonderful. What should people look for when they're deciding on a hospice group or facility? Are there certain things that should be avoided? Are there certain things that they should be asking?
This is a good question because a lot of people don't realize that there are many hospices out there. So there's not just one hospice in your area. There may be, like in the little town where I live, there's like 12 hospice agencies. And so bigger cities, there's way more than that. And they may not all be the same. So I think that having a list of questions is very important. First of all, you can go to the government website, Hospice Compare, and you can look at the hospice star ratings and they do patient satisfaction surveys, and all of that stuff is up there on the Hospice Compare. Can be a little bit work getting through it, but it's definitely worth it. And you can take if you have names of hospices, you can plug those in and they'll actually compare one to the other just to see how they all do in the ratings. But I think it's important, first of all, to ask the hospice agency how frequently the nurses' visits are. What is their routine? Is it twice a week? I think it should at least be twice a week. I'd want to know that. And if they need a nurse 7 days a week, is that a possibility? If they need a CNA 7 days a week, is that something that the agency offers? I would want to know if if they have references or where their referrals are, and look at those kind of things. What is their plan for supporting the patient? Do they offer continuous care? Do they offer inpatient care if that becomes necessary? Because sometimes when there are symptoms that we can't manage at home, the patient does need to go into a hospice inpatient unit for a few days until we can get the symptoms managed. So do they offer those kind of things? I really think the most important thing is, though, how frequent their visits are. Do they work with death doulas? Do they have those kind of things that they recommend, this ancillary support that is so important in the care? Um, and I think really checking with more than one. I would probably meet with 3 different companies before I made a choice. Even though you feel like you're going to like that first person, I would want to meet with the other ones as well. So I think that's probably the most important things to know.
As the person or the patient gets closer to death, closer to an active death, should all those visits increase? Do they increase in length? What does that look like?
Yes. So the visit should definitely increase. And so we usually know. It's going to be very, very rare that we don't know. And your hospice nurse and your hospice team is going to be upfront with you about that. They're going to let you know, hey, things are declining and here's what we think. Except with the children, like even talking about the little girl, with the children, we don't always know. Sometimes that happens pretty quickly. But with the adults, when we know, we will start increasing the visits. And it's every person is different. So, and we try to keep it individualized to what we feel will work best for that patient and for that family. Sometimes it'll be daily. Sometimes it's twice a day. Sometimes it's every other day with a phone call because some people don't want us in the home. So I think that we have to be aware of whatever it is that the family wants and have those open lines of communication.
Are you usually there for the death?
So in the old days, yes, I would tell you that probably 100% of the time, not 100%, but very close to it. I pretty much always knew, and we always had someone there, and we were able to staff that way. But I'm going to be honest with you, these days, a lot of times we're not. Yeah. We want to be, and we would like to be, but we have other places and other patients we have to go see. And so it just doesn't always work out. Even after hours, we used to stay with our patients after hours, or the on-call nurse would sit with them, but a lot of times they're so busy too that I would say that to actually be there when the person passed away is probably less common than it is common now. It's probably the exception to the rule now.
Thank you for that honesty. I know that's people just assume.
Yeah.
As you said, they're assuming that they're going to get 7 by 24 and people are going to.
Doesn't really happen that much anymore. And a lot of patients and family members think that they can just go in the hospital when this is. And Medicare says no, this is not a reason. Medicare will not cover that. So we got to get you prepared to be at home and to probably be with them by yourself if they don't have a doula, for sure.
So our last question, what advice would you give to someone considering hospice care for themselves or for a loved one? I know that's a decision that the doctor makes, but what advice would you give to them?
So I think like what I'd said before is pick your hospice carefully, first of all, and know that just because you sign up on hospice, it doesn't mean you can't change your mind. And I think this is really important. And I always tell everybody this during the admission process, that if for some reason a miracle cure comes up tomorrow, you just quit hospice. You can stop hospice. You can go try it out. We're not going to get mad at you. And then if you want to come back, you can come back on hospice. So I think that's real important for people to understand. And that brings a lot of people relief, and people will be more likely to sign up for hospice when they realize that they do have choices while they're on hospice. But I think that also there are several hospices. So if you start with one hospice and it's just not working with you, maybe you just don't click with that hospice, or you don't click with those people, you can definitely try. You can transfer to another hospice at any time. And I think it's important that you work with a hospice company that is open to your requests. So if you want to do something a certain way, you should have the right to do that. If you want to bring different team members on, you should have the right to do that too.
Well, Shelley, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your insights with us. How can people reach you if they need to?
So you can definitely go to my website. That's amitystaffing.com. amitystaffing.com. Also you can email me from the site too. You can fill out the contact form there, and I'd be glad to reach out with you. That's probably the easiest way to do it, to reach me.
Great. And we'll have that link in the description of this podcast for everyone. Folks, thank you for joining us today. I hope that this conversation has provided an understanding of the importance and benefits of hospice care and has perhaps eased some of your concerns or misconceptions. If you have any questions or thoughts you'd like to share, please comment below or reach out to me directly. And if you found this conversation to be helpful, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. This is Traci Arieli from Comforting Closure, wishing you peace and comfort in your journey. Until next time, take care.